Hi, I'm Brian. This is Brian Reads to You, where I'll read everything from the classics to the not so classics, poetry, music, and more. I hope you enjoy. Today we're going to be reading
Princess Sophia by Brian K. Eddy, with illustrations by The Horses. Chapter 1 The Seven Kingdoms. Long, long ago, in the far off kingdom of Pacama, the people were unhappy. Their king was a mean, cruel man. He wanted everyone to work, work, work all the time. He did not allow anyone to sing, dance, or even pinch each other on St. Patrick's Day. The name of this horrid, stinky king was Harold Nostrum, though everyone called him Hairy Nostril because he had big, bushy red hair growing out of his nose. It looked like fiery boogers were shooting out whenever he sneezed. Eventually, most of the people decided they did not want him to be their king anymore. First, they asked him to quit, but he said no way and threw them out of the palace. Then they told him he had to quit, but he yelled, "No way!" shaking his red hair like a lion. Finally, the people returned with all the knights and told him, "You are no longer our king." Hearing this, old Hairy Nostril screamed, "No way!" and blew great big red fire boogers at them. The leader of the people, whose name was Pisanna, wiped the boogers off his face, showed them to the king, and said, "This means war." After many years of ugly, terrible battle, King Harold was deposed, and he fled to the eastern lands far, far away. The people now had to choose a new king. Some wanted Pisanna, others wanted the son of Harold, or someone else, or no king at all. Pisanna was very wise and gathered the leaders of all the people around. "Let us not fight any more," he said. "We are all one people. You are my brothers and sisters, cousins, second cousins, third cousins, aunts, doctors, roommates." All the people smiled. "Let those who wish to follow me gather in one place. Those who want Harold's son Bloda can go to him at the western shore. Choose your own leaders, and let us have peace." Thus, Pacama split into 4 kingdoms: Pisanna in the north and south, Pacama in the west, and the honoriest people went to the east to form Pisonia. But the wildest and most ferocious group rode their horses high into the central mountains, where they founded the Kingdom of Shadows. For 1,300 years, the kingdoms lived side by side. Sometimes they fought wars over boundaries or pirates or who had the most beautiful queen, but mostly they got along okay. In time, southern Pisanna gained its independence from the northern kingdom. The people of Pisonia continued to be angry, rude, and just plain mean, so that they split into northern, central, and southern lands. Thus were founded the 7 kingdoms. Each kingdom made something special that the others wanted to trade for. North Pisanna had vast fleets of boats that brought in all the fish you could imagine. South Pisanna boasted of mighty forests, which they took care of and tended wisely so they never ran out of wood for building. Pacama grew the most delicious foods you have ever eaten. The 3 kingdoms of Pisonia had hundreds of deep mines, which gave them gold, silver, diamonds, and every other valuable mineral or metal. However, the most mysterious of all was the Kingdom of Shadows, who raised the best horses anyone had ever seen. No one understood how they did it way up in the high, cold mountains, but everyone knew that a shadow horse was very, very special. Chapter 2 The Mystery. Our story begins a few days before the 15th birthday of the crown prince of North Pisania. The king gave him responsibility for the three castles that guarded the Great Circle Road. It ran through six of the kingdoms, all the way around the mountains, which stood in the middle of the land. Prince Calvin, for that was his name, was excited. Finally, he had something important to do for the kingdom. As he prepared to ride forth and inspect the castles, a troubling mystery arose. "Sir Donovan, Sir Donovan," he called to the knight who would escort him on the trip, "come look at this map." The tall, strong knight walked slowly into the palace library. On the table spread a huge map showing the entire land. In the six kingdoms, Calvin could find large cities, small villages, and even most of the ice cream shops. But inside the Circle Mountains, it was completely blank except the name, the Kingdom of Shadows. "Donovan, something is missing. Here is the eastern castle, where the mountains meet the border between North Pisonia and us. And way over here in the west is the second castle, next to Pacama." He looked at his friend and asked, "Where is the third castle, the one protecting the way into the Kingdom of Shadows? I can't even find the road that leads up into the mountains." Donovan looked down with both a stern and kindly face. "Only two people in our entire kingdom know where that road lies, the king and myself. Now that you have command of the three castles, I shall show you the secret road. You must be careful, though, and be warned. It is under an enchantment, and will give you back whatever you take with you." Donovan was always saying weird things like that, and, anyway, Calvin had stopped listening after "I shall show you the secret road." Their bags packed and horses saddled, the two friends rode out of the wide silver gates of Castle Icthalane. Calvin was excited for the adventure and eager to go. Just as they were leaving the gardens surrounding the castle, he saw his mother carefully trimming a rose bush. It irritated him a bit when she called him over for a chat.
"Yes, mother," Calvin said as he rode up to her. "I hear you are going to inspect the castles." "Yes." "Why are you going?" she asked quietly. Calvin was very confused. "Because father gave them to me and told me to take care of them." "So you are doing what you are told to do," she replied, still snipping away at the bush. "Of course. It is my duty as prince, and I always want to please father." "Ah," she said suddenly, "you want to please your father. My son, do you want to inspect the castles, or do you want to go on an adventure and please your family?" Calvin thought long and hard about this. He'd never considered the real why of what he did. "Yes, mother, I guess that really is what I want." "Good. It is always important to understand why you do things," she answered softly. Not once had she looked at Calvin, and soon changed the conversation. "Did you know that everything has needs? This flower, for instance. It needs good soil, rain, sunlight. Without those, it will wither and die, just like that bush over there in the shade. Always remember that. Everything has a need." "Okay," he said, confused. Finally, she looked in his eyes and smiled. "Have fun. Listen to Donovan. Remember I love you. And don't go chasing any dragons." The two friends had a wonderful time on their travels. It was a warm, clear summer day. Calvin rode his favorite horse, Neighbor, and Sir Donovan told many stories about the history and glory of the six kingdoms. He spoke of adventures in the deep, dark forests of South Pisonia, about wars with the other lands, and battles with wild, lawless pirates, and the strange, fierce creatures found in the mountains. However,
Not even this wise knight knew much about the kingdom of shadows. Their first evening on the road, after the sun said good night, but long before Calvin could, he turned over in his sleeping bag and asked his friend a question. Donovan, some of the other knights were talking yesterday about dragons. He didn't really want to mention his mommy right now, since he was supposed to be mature and everything. Are there any dragons where we're going? Sir Donovan looked kindly at his young lord. He could see how scared Calvin was, and hear it in his voice. How brave to have held on this long before asking. Nothing wrong with that, thought Donovan. Only a fool isn't scared of a 100-ton flying lizard with 20 razor-sharp claws, 50 spear-like teeth, who kills knights, eats princesses, and blows the hottest, stinkiest jalapeno fire breath you can imagine. I'd want to go hide under my bed. No, answered Donovan. And yes, long ago there were thousands of dragons all over the 7 kingdoms. However, as people spread, they either killed or pushed out all the wild serpents. Finally, only a few hundred remained, and all of them settled high in the mountains. Wizards will sometimes go to afternoon tea in a dragon's cave, or heal them of a deadly wound. Knights still hunt them for glory, but rarely come home uncooked. Donovan sighed deeply. But no one has seen a dragon up close in North Pisonia for hundreds of years. Calvin stopped chewing on his lip, tore his eyes away from the large winged shadow on the moon, settled deep into his pillow, and started counting sheep as they floated by in the talons of hundreds of hungry dragons. After 2 full days, they arrived at the castle Arg. It wasn't very big or pretty, just cold and gloomy, and nothing inside but a single empty ice cream container. The only nice thing about Arg was a wide moat that flowed around and around in circles like a lazy river. Calvin liked to float in the water and splash the knights who guarded it. Arg was a very old castle from the very first years after Pacama divided into 7 kingdoms. Back then, a person who built something was called a wright. So shipwrights built ships, and wheelwrights built wheels. Often their job name became their family name, like John the Baker became John Baker. This particular castle wright was called Frank, and soon Frank Wright. He was famous for designing very unusual castles that were not always pretty, but very defendable. Arg was like a bunch of boxes stacked on top of each other, just underneath a huge waterfall coming off a cliff of the mountains. The water crashed on top of the castle and then flowed in 100 waterfalls off all the different sides of all the boxes. Eventually, the water collected in that moat and then wandered off to the west, looking for the sea. You might wonder how Arg got such an unusual name. I did too. So I asked my grandfather. He said that when Dinky, the queen of Pacama, came to see it, her pet rabbit got so scared of all the water it bit her, and Dinky screamed, "Arg!" Crown princes enjoy very little time to play, and soon they had to leave Arg and go back on the road. After checking that all was well and supplying the guard with enough ice cream and cake to keep everyone happy for a long time, they left on the long ride to the east. Calvin was very tired and very, very happy when they arrived at the castle Glug Glug on the border of North Pisonia and North Pisonia. After riding for 3½ days, even his eyelashes were saddle sore. Glug Glug held a special place in the history between these 2 kingdoms. 200 years ago, the king of Pisonia, Buffont, had his architects construct a magnificent new castle on the Great Circle Road. It was tall, large, covered in gold and silver, with diamonds and emeralds and rubies galore. In the morning sun it shone like fire, and moonlight made it look magical. They only made one tiny little mistake. It was 17.5 feet over the border with Pisanna. The king of North Pisanna, Bob, did not want to lose any land to Pisanna, but he did not want to go to war either. Buffon could not move the castle, he did not want to give it away, and he certainly did not want to go to war with his second cousin. So how do you think they solved the problem? They decided to have a test of strength, and the winner would keep the castle. All their wisest advisors thought and thought and thought and thought about what kind of test to have. Finally, the personal chef de Buffon and the best maker of cookies in the whole land gave them the answer. She said, "I have a special recipe for lemonade. We only give it to the dragon that comes down from the mountain every month or so because his fire gets cool. This lemonade perks him right up. Whomever can drink the most without spitting it up or bursting into flames will be the winner." All agreed, and the chef made them an extra strong batch just to make sure there wasn't a tie. Buffon went first. He lifted the golden, smoking goblet of lemonade to his lips and swallowed one mouthful. Glug. His face turned red, then green, then blue. His lips began to purse until his mouth disappeared entirely. He could not drink any more. In fact, he could not even open his mouth for 3 days. "All hail King Buffon!" his people cried, for no mortal had ever swallowed a full mouthful of dragonade before. Surely they had won. Then it was King Bob's turn. Slowly he poured in a big mouthful of the golden liquid, took a deep breath in through his nose, and swallowed. Glug. The sour went through him, curling his fingers and toes. His tummy was on fire, and after a few seconds he belched a massive fireball, singeing a nearby tree. Immediately his mouth also pursed into a tiny, almost invisible hole. "Ha ha ha!" laughed the Pisonians. "You'll never get any more into your mouth." Now was the moment of truth. Bob looked at his followers, winked, and then pulled out a straw. He dipped it into the dragonade, put his tiny mouth over the straw, and drew in for all he was worth. Then he swallowed. Glug. At first he cried, then he wailed. Slowly all the hair on his head turned yellow, but he did not spit it up, nor did he explode. Bob had won. He named the castle Glug Glug in honor of his 2 swallows, and never drank lemonade again. Calvin and Donovan found that the castle was safe and the guards were happy. They barely stayed one night at Glug Glug, just long enough for the horses to rest and for them to enjoy some amazing lemonade. After a few hours' sleep, they were up while it was still dark and rode many miles before breakfast. Along the way, Calvin asked over and over again, "How will I know the secret road when I see it?" And, "Why are we riding west again? If it's back there, why didn't we stop earlier?" After hearing, "Are we there yet?" for the 42nd time, Sir Donovan stopped his horse smack in the middle of the road. "Calvin, I know you can't wait to visit the 3rd castle. I felt the same when your father took me there. Yet sometimes it is better to wait. Learn to be patient. Soon you will know all that I do about the castle vigilance." Calvin's mind raced with questions all that day, even as he and the knight rode on in silence. My father brought Donovan to the castle? Why? When? I'm responsible for it, and Arg, and Glug Glug. Was Donovan in charge while I was little? But it came to me because I'm the prince. Why did Donovan have command? And why Why is it called vigilance? Are we enemies with the kingdom of shadows? Are they going to attack us and we must watch them carefully? Calvin had a hard time being patient, but tried nonetheless. The trip had become boring, the mountains to their left, wide empty grasslands to their right, and the horizon before them that never seemed to move. Donovan urged them into a trot and covered a long distance by evening of the second day. A tiny dot appeared in the distance. Finally, there was something to look at. The dot seemed to be moving back and forth. As it grew larger, he could see trees on the side of the road. He remembered this place as a beautiful oasis. A large stream flowed from the mountains and splashed under a bridge. It poured into the circle of fruit trees and formed a smooth, cool pond, deep enough for swimming. There was lush green grass all around for their horses to eat, and then relax their road-weary feet. The prince looked around and thought, "This place is very special. It's perfect. Maybe too perfect. Almost magical." "Donovan," he said slowly, using his deep grown-up voice, "is the road here, somewhere?" He looked all around, but only found grass to the north, a huge solid rock cliff to the south, and the great circle road in between. Donovan looked up from where he had prepared a sleeping spot and whispered, "In the morning, my prince, in the morning," and rolled over to sleep. Chapter 3. The Secret. Calvin was dreaming of his great big prince-sized bed at Ichthelaine Castle. It was warm and soft, with deep pillows and a butler just waiting for him to call for a morning cup of hot chocolate. Even the smaller but still comfortable royal beds at Arg and Glug were nice. However, as he awoke at the rest area, with a root in his back and neighbor licking his face, Calvin began to think that adventures might not be as fun as Donovan had made them out to be. "Come on, my little princeling, up, up, up!" cried Donovan joyously. "We have only a few minutes before the secret is revealed." They were packed and ready, lickety-split. Breakfast was dried fish, bread, cheese, and fresh fruit from the surrounding trees. The apples were crisp, the cherries juicy and tart. They drank deeply from the stream running down from the mountains, and to top everything off, Donovan plucked 2 huge, weird-shaped fruit from a very small bush. Their horses were enjoying that fruit very, very much. "These are something special," he said with a wink. "Horse hearts. You will find them nowhere else in the 6 kingdoms." He held up the heart-shaped fruit with its green skin and blue dots. Calvin thought it looked more poisonous than delicious, but he trusted his friend and took a deep bite. If he didn't know better, Calvin would have sworn he was eating mint chocolate cotton candy. It was sweet and fresh and made his mouth laugh. The purple juice dribbled onto his fingers and stained them the dark color of his father's royal robes. "This is amazing! I've never seen them before. Where did you come from?" Donovan smiled and whispered, "A gift from the Queen of the Kingdom of Shadows. It has grown here for nearly 400 years. They have many different fruits and vegetables up there. One must be careful of eating too many. They can change you." Calvin was growing too excited to worry about what that meant, for they were finally crossing the road and headed for the secret path. Before them stood a huge wall of black rock like polished marble. Calvin could not see the top, it was so tall. Not a single crack marred its surface. "How?" he began, but Donovan shushed him. The sun was rising, and as the first beams crawled down the face of the cliff, a shape began to form. The light was reflecting off a certain area of the rock. Calvin leaned to one side and the other, and the shape faded away. If he were even 2 steps from this spot, he wouldn't have seen the glowing arrow which pointed down and to their left. Yes, Calvin, one must stand right here at this very time in order to see the arrow. But there is more. Donovan led the way down the small hill and right up to the very foot of the cliff. They dismounted, and Donovan began to feel the rock just where the arrow pointed. He laughed, took a step forward and sideways, then disappeared. Calvin jumped back in surprise. It was no less terrifying when Donovan's head reappeared without his body. Come, my prince, here is the beginning of the path. Once again, Calvin showed trust in his knight and stepped forward. There was a large crack in the rock that could only be found by touch. It all looked so perfectly smooth that you could not see it from 5 feet away. Someone on the road would never know it was there. The path was so narrow with walls on each side that they could not ride, and had to lead their horses slowly up the now climbing track. It turned left and right and left again until they were almost halfway up the cliff. That is when they entered the cave. It was almost completely dark inside, except for one brilliant beam of sunlight shooting like a laser through a tiny hole above their heads. A strange plant covered the walls and roof in thick gold tendrils, red leaves, and deadly-looking spikes. Watch and wait, Calvin. Do not touch the plant. It is called Dragon's Tail, and will kill you before I can move. From here you must do exactly what I tell you without question. This is the least dangerous part of the secret path. Calvin had no trouble agreeing to that warning. A tiny piece of him even wondered a bit if this might be too dangerous an adventure for the crown prince. After all, he thought, someone had to be the next king, right? Slowly the beam of light walked across the wall. Wherever it landed, the dragon's tail slithered and drew back, as if the light were painful to it. Finally, after several minutes, it struck a flat surface to their right. The golden plant writhed and twisted until it had completely withdrawn from the area, revealing a hidden passage. The two men and their horses quickly stepped through, and within seconds the opening disappeared under the now furious guardian. Well, we have passed the first test. Well done, Calvin. The light will only open this doorway once a year on this very day. No one has found another way to get through. I guess real dragon's fire might burn the plant, but nothing else has ever worked. The prince spent a good deal of time wondering who had tried to get through the passage before, and what things they had tried. Images came to his mind of gleaming swords, powerful spells, even poisons. He hoped Donovan would share that story eventually. They had been moving silently for what seemed like hours, feeling their way along the pitch-black road. It was still turning back and forth and rising higher. Then Calvin saw the faintest glow ahead. Round the next corner was definitely some light. It even looked like daylight. They rounded the bend and suddenly found themselves on a wide path open to the sky above, and looking out over the whole of North Pisanna. It took a while for his eyes to stop blinking in the bright sun. The view was glorious. Green, yellow, and brown fields of grass stretched out in all directions. The road to Ichthelane was clear to see headed north. Small caravans of travelers crept slowly by 5,000 feet below. Far off in the distance, Calvin could just make out the sparkling of sunlight on the sea. He would have been quite happy to sit here all day looking at his homeland. He'd never thought of it as beautiful before, yet right now it was more valuable to him than any amount of gold or jewels. "I believe it is time to take a long rest," announced Donovan. They spread out a cloak on the ground and rubbed their sore legs. The exercise gave Calvin a gigantic rumbly tummy. Donovan produced 2 more of the heart-shaped fruit from somewhere in his baggage, and Calvin swallowed it with delight. Almost instantly the pain melted away, and he felt more energetic than ever before, even more than on his last birthday. Even still, Donovan insisted they take a short nap, and all 4 of them settled in. Moments later, a horrible clang, clang, clang woke them up. It sounded like someone banging pots and pans together. Closer and closer it got, louder and louder it grew, until out of the shadows on the path ahead they saw a knight of North Pisannia running down the road towards them in complete terror. "A monster!" the fleeing knight screamed. "A monster at the castle! Run! Run for your lives!" He passed by them in a flash of clanking armor, shot into the tunnel, and left behind only echoes in the distance. "Imagine that," muttered Donovan incredulously. "A Pisannian knight running from anything, and scared, too." Calvin's fear rose just a little, like some tiny creature in his heart that wanted to make him turn around and go home. Donovan's words did not help, for Calvin had always thought nothing, absolutely nothing, could scare a Pisannian knight. "So, Calvin, are you ready to help me investigate this mystery? We are going to the castle anyway, so I do not suppose it will take us far off our path." Calvin took a deep breath, and for the third time that day let Donovan's confidence lead him on. However, it did nothing to soothe the rapid beating of his own heart. The road up was now wide and sturdy enough for them to mount. Neighbors seemed excited to move forward, and they began to make very good progress. They had nearly doubled their height into the mountains when a familiar sound came rolling down the hill above. Clang, 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 clang! From around the next corner came two knights, their cloaks flying behind them, helmets clutched in their hands. Both looked as scared as a turkey just before Thanksgiving. "Beware! Beware!" they shouted as they ran. "The beast and its pet have taken the castle. No one can stand before them." Calvin tried to ask what was happening. What was the beast? But they ran too fast and gave no answer. Donovan's only reaction was to grip the handle of his sword tightly and look up the mountain with a face of anger and determination. Their pace up the mountain seemed to slow down now. Donovan was paying very close attention to everything, as if they might be attacked any second. Calvin's fear climbed up into his throat. A cloud seemed to pass over the sun. Around them the trees drew closer together, and strange shuffling sounds could be heard from the darkness. Neighbor did not seem to have any trouble with the road, even though Calvin saw roots and sharp rocks everywhere. The wind grew chill about them. A dark form flew above them high in the clouded sky. Donovan didn't seem to notice any of these things. The knot of terror in Calvin's throat swelled, and he began to gasp for air. He needed to talk just so he could breathe. "Donovan, I've been wondering something." "Yes?" asked the knight distractedly. "You told me that only you and my father knew about this path, that he brought you up here before. Why you? Why did he bring me?" Donovan stopped his horse and looked deeply into Calvin's eyes. Perhaps now was a time for sharing secrets. "Many years ago, before you were born, your mother and father grew afraid that they might never have any children. A kingdom needs a prince. The people need to know who is going to rule next. Otherwise, someone not so good might rise up and try to seize power. No one else knows, but I am your cousin." My cousin?" Calvin spluttered. "But why didn't anyone tell me?" Donovan's hard brown eyes softened. "Your father became king at the perfect age of 30. There were 11 brothers in all, Kent, 9 others, and then my father, Joseph. 9 princes in line for the throne before him. So he married not a noblewoman or even a very rich merchant's daughter. No, he chose a fisherman's girl who could sail and sing and paint. He loved my mother very much." "So what happened?" asked Calvin quietly. With a sigh, Donovan answered, "Oh, there were wars and accidents, illnesses. One by one, all the men who would be king died, and still your father had no child. Baird the magician told the king some evil person was making these things happen so they could take over and rule. They decided to hide me. I was still just an infant, and no one paid any attention to my father anyway. When I turned 15, the king brought me up this road and told me who I was and who I might become. He swore me to secrecy to protect me from whomever this villain was. A few years later, I became a full knight, and you were born just after. My king asked me to give him the very great service of protecting you. I was honored and pledged my life to guard you. But, but you gave up your chance to be king. Didn't you want to rule? Suddenly, the thought of Donovan luring him up into the mountains, where a terrible accident might happen, filled Calvin's mind. He looked around for a way to escape, to run away, but there was a solid wall of dark forest on both sides of the path. Donovan threw back his head and laughed. Never before had Calvin seen this man so happy. He steeled his mind and shouted to himself, "No! Donovan would never, could never hurt me!" The terrible thought shredded and drifted away like spider webs in a strong wind. "My cousin, don't you understand? I never wanted to be king. I only wanted a simple life like my mother. Now that you know my secret, I am free, free to live. Now I renew my oath to you. I will guard you throughout my days. I am your true and loyal knight. In time, you will be my king, and nothing would bring me greater joy than to see you on the throne." With newfound bravery pulsing through his heart, Calvin reached out and hugged his cousin. With joy, Donovan hugged back. Looking around, Calvin saw that the trees were not so dark now. Pleasant yellow light broke through the canopy and lit everything with a soft green glow. He didn't understand why it was so scary just moments ago, though he was awfully glad it wasn't now. The knight gave out with a loud "Hi-yah!" and began to gallop up the road. Calvin grinned and urged neighbor into a chase. Minutes later, Calvin saw in the distance a king's worst fear. 3 of his own knights, brave men he had known all his life, were running down the path screaming and throwing their armor away. "The red-headed demon awaits! Turn back! Turn back! Fire and destruction and death! Turn back!" 1 and 2 and 3 make 6, thought Calvin. All 6 of the knights guarding the castle have fled. We must be ready for this monster. They flew past another 2 windings of the road, which then turned hard to the right and leveled out. Before them, nestled between 2 impossibly sharp peaks, stood the Castle Vigilance.
I hope that was fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. Tell your friends. Talk to you later. Bye.